Okay, colleagues, good morning. My name is Kidibone Paho. I am in for Naledi Modise. She is our program director this morning, but she's struggling with connection. So when you see me here, you just know that I am standing in for her, but when she comes on, she will definitely take over. So no need to worry about that. I just want to welcome everyone, but it is not my role per se, colleagues. We have our executive dean as part of this seminar on the local government elections at a glance. Prof. Moyo?
Good morning and thanks, Prof. Paho, and warm welcome to everyone to this very important webinar. I want to start by thanking Professor Paho, who is our director for the School of Government Studies, and his colleagues for organizing this event at this very timely moment. South Africa's democratic process, as you all know, includes the consolidation of the local government system. And this consolidation commenced between 1996 and 2000 and sought to establish transitional arrangements that allowed a merger of a myriad local councils into one, and also allowing former homelands and rural areas to be demarcated accordingly. Subsequently, the local government elections took place in 2000, allowing citizens to participate in the determination of their local political and governance landscape. One main factor here was to ensure a developmental local government that is able to contribute to the sustainable means of improving the social, economic, and material living conditions of citizens. It is necessary to remind our delegates that the November 2021 local government elections are the 6th local government elections since the democratization path was instituted. It is clear that the system of local government is maturing and the elections are highly contested, especially in our towns and cities, with clear signs of potential coalitions to form administration in several of the municipalities. This means South African voters are beginning to realize their role and potential effect on the outcome of elections of this nature. The malfunctioning of many municipalities that are unable to render basic services is a major factor in this regard. This negates the developmental notion which was used as a constitutional basis for establishing of local government system in South Africa. So Chapter 7 of the Constitution offers these as some of the substantive elements. This is where the object of local government considers the critical notions of democracy, accountability, service provision, socio-economic development, and safe and healthy environment, healthy environment, among others. Colleagues, the School of Government Studies at the Northwest-Universiteit has organized this important seminar on the eve of the 6th local government elections taking place on 1st of November in 2021. This is because, according to Danny Nadebure in his monograph titled Achimafeje, Scholar, Activist, and Thinker, artists should strive to establish the lost organic links between them and ordinary Africans. Not only the artist must be conversant with the details of local languages of the people, but must also be conversant with local cultures as well. So the artists of this local government discourse are the public representative and politicians vying for these public offices. We need to ask ourselves if we are convinced as voters that these artists or public representatives offer any meaningful value for our taxes and that they speak our language of socio-economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, our panelists are ready to share their insights on a range of issues as outlined on the program. Our epistemological pursuit on the governance and political question on local government elections is an attempt to reawaken our consciousness as citizens to reflect deeply about our democratic processes. The debates here include the integrity of the electoral process, elections management processes, and the potential effects of COVID-19 on the election outcomes, as well as what opposition parties stand to benefit, among others. With these few words, I would like to welcome our esteemed panel of speakers, Mr. Terry Tselane, Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, Dr. Mfariseni Natswera, Dr. Piet Krukamp, and Miss Naledi Modise, who is directing our program for this event. I also want to welcome everyone again and hope that we are going to have an enriching experience this morning. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. Moyo, for your incisive remarks. We really appreciate your support and leadership in the faculty. I'm not going to waste time. I see Naledi is back. Naledi, can you take over, please?
Thank you, Prof. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the colleagues. I am sorry to be joining just a bit late. I have the program with me, and I don't know in the opening remarks whether housekeeping was discussed, in that each speaker will be allowed 10 minutes, and thereafter, immediately one speaker will speak after the other. So firstly, we'll have Mr. Terry Tselane from AIMSA, and then we'll speak thereafter, we'll just transition to Dr. Breakfast, and then move to the discussants, which are Dr. Piet Krukamp and Dr. Ntswera. So each speaker has 10 minutes. I will introduce the speaker not with their bio, but instead with the abstract of the paper that they will be sharing with us this morning. And at the 10-minute mark, I will send, or close to the 10-minute mark, I will send each speaker just a slight notification that they're almost out of time, so that the transition is easy and we don't have to have me interrupt the speaker. Thank you. So the first speaker for the day is Mr. Terry Tselane, and he will be talking to us about the use of AIMSA's elections integrity wheel to analyze South Africa's 2019 national and provincial elections. And so the paper highlights the use of AIMSA's elections integrity wheel to analyze South Africa's 2019 national and provincial elections, analysis of election practices and literature review on elections has exposed shortcomings of the current approaches in the examination of the integrity of electoral processes. So the AIMSA elections integrity wheel has been used to identify key issues and weaknesses in the administration of South Africa's 2019 national and provincial elections. This is the first study to use AIMSA's elections integrity wheel to analyze the administration of elections, and such an analysis is important in the intervention in the assessment of the integrity of elections. So I'll hand over to you, Mr. Tselane, to take us through the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. And let me also greet all the participants in this important webinar. Perhaps as a start, I should indicate that the election integrity wheel that we developed as IMSA, we developed it over a period of almost 20 years, having observed the elections in the African continent as well as outside the continent. We have used the literature review, and we also have used particularly my own experience as an electoral official or administrator, having worked within the commission for 20 years. So we have used all these reports to try to develop a tool that we can use to basically assess the integrity of the elections. And then what actually forced us to begin to move in this area, it is largely because quite a number of people who... I think I was interrupted there. I wanted to say that, so after having gone through all these processes and having identified weaknesses, particularly election observation missions, we decided to develop this tool in order to use it as a tool to assess the integrity of the elections. Now, the integrity wheel has got about 5 key areas. And I'm going to talk broadly about those 5 key areas. And then from there, I will now begin to move into each and every area or pillar within the integrity wheel, and perhaps also towards the end, do a reflection on the current situation for preparations for local government, but still using the integrity wheel as a tool of analysis. The integrity wheel is basically centered around 5 key pillars. The first one is the political environment. And I think it is important also just to indicate that the assessment of the integrity of the elections is also important in terms of coming to a determination as to whether the elections are free, were free and fair. Quite a number of people will talk about the elections being free and fair, or whether the elections were free and fair, but not really having a proper tool or framework that they can use to be able to make that particular determination. So when I talk about the integrity of the elections, you must also read it within the context of whether the elections are free and fair. So the first aspect that I'm focusing on here is the political environment. The political environment is quite important in terms of the determination of the integrity of the elections. And for instance, if you have a situation where there are particular areas that are regarded as no-go areas where certain political parties cannot canvass for support, then that is likely to contaminate the electoral processes, and consequently will lead to a situation where the elections can be nullified or contested on the basis that they could not have been free and fair. The second leg that we are using in this integrity wheel is the legal framework. Legal framework basically refers to a framework that determines the way the elections are supposed to be run. In the context of South Africa, we start firstly with a constitution. Section 190 of the constitution will indicate that, or rather will empower the Electoral Commission to do three things. The first one, as part of the mandate of the commission, is to organize, manage, and deliver the elections. And the second, to ensure that those elections are free and fair. And the third, to declare the results thereof. So it is not the responsibility of the commission to declare the results of the elections as free and fair. The constitution just requires the commission to ensure that those elections are free and fair. And but to declare the results, even if there are only 2 people who have voted, the commission has got no other option but to make sure that they can, I mean, they should declare the results thereof. So the legal framework is very, very important in terms of making sure that there is consistency, the rules are applied consistently, irrespective of where people are in the country. And then after the Constitution, obviously, there are a myriad of other pieces of legislation that determines the framework within which the elections take place. In our context, again, it is the Municipal Electoral Act, the Municipal Structures Act, the Electoral Act, and the Municipal Systems Act. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework for local government when towards the end. So these two pillars are important in terms of determination of whether the elections are free or fair, or whether the elections have got any integrity at all. And then the third leg or pillar is the voters' roll. The voters' roll is so important because it determines the eligibility of people to participate in the electoral processes. It is a register indicating those people who are supposed to be participating in an election. In the context, again, of South Africa, you've got to be 18 years and above. You've got to have an ID, a barcoded ID, or alternatively, I'm not too sure whether you can still follow me, Chairperson. Electricity has just disappeared here. Can you still hear me?
We can still hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as I was saying, the voters' roll is quite important in terms of determination of the integrity of the elections. You may recall that in 2016, the Electoral Commission had difficulties in Tlokwe when people who were not supposed to have participated in the by-elections there were allowed to register and to participate in those elections. And it contaminated the whole election in a sense that even as we were moving towards 2016 local government elections, there was no clarity as to whether the elections were going to be proceeding with the voters' roll that the Electoral Commission had at that time, particularly because the Commission had not complied with Section 16.3 of the Electoral Act, which requires that every person who is in the voters' roll should have an address. And if you don't have an address, it becomes difficult for the Commission to be able to locate the person within the correct voting district, and also for the political parties to be able to contest to the right audience. So voters' roll is important as part of dealing with this particular matters. The fourth pillar is human capital, or the quality of the electoral staff. If you've got people who are running the elections, they don't understand the processes, they apply the rules inconsistently, that can also affect and contaminate the electoral processes. So human capital is very, very important. And then I will indicate when I deal now with the 2019 elections, some of the difficulties that were encountered. The last one is the quality of the logistics of the elections. And logistics essentially refers to having the right amount of the materials, right places at the right time. So if, for instance, you are having an election like we are going to be having now for local government, and you find that the ballot papers that are supposed to be used in Johannesburg are in Ekurhuleni, and then that can affect also the integrity of the elections, because it would mean that people cannot actually vote for the people that they are supposed to be voting for. So the logistics, it's an important aspect of ensuring the integrity of the elections. So now let's look at what happened in 2019 in South Africa. And I'm going to quickly just go through that particular aspect. The issue of the voters' roll was still an issue, in a sense that the voters' roll that the Commission was using did not contain the names, rather they did not contain the addresses for every person who was supposed to have an address. I've already indicated why this is important in the context of South Africa, because the legislation requires every person who is on a voters' roll to have an address. And This issue was emphasized during the Constitutional Court hearing on the Tlokwe matter when Justice Madanga essentially indicated that the role of an address, as I've indicated earlier, the dual role of the address is to ensure that firstly, political parties contest to the correct audience, and secondly, that the Electoral Commission can actually be able to locate a person within a particular voting district. And it becomes even more important when it comes to local government, because remember that we have for the elections almost 4,500 distinct ballots for each and every for each and every ward. And therefore it becomes important that the people who are located in that particular area are people who are supposed to be participating in that election. The second issue that I am referring to here also on the issue of the integrity of the elections of 2019. I'm not too sure whether you will recall, but quite a number of people during those elections were voting, or there were allegations that people had voted more than once, which forced the commission to get the Statistician General to investigate those allegations. Now, the report of the Statistician General was released, and that report basically, they took about 1,400 voting districts, a sample of about 1,400 voting districts or voting stations, and assessed the allegations against the information that they were getting. So they used what they call Section 24A forms. Now, Section 24A, it's a form that is used if a person is voting in a district where they are not registered. In national and provincial elections, it is possible for a person to vote in an area where they are not registered. Let me just check whether I still have time. Okay, thank you very much. So they found that almost 44% of people who had actually in the voting districts that they assessed did not, I mean, they could have irregularly voted because they were voting in areas where they were not registered. So they looked at the number of Section 24 forms that were used, which indicated that a person is registering or is voting in an area where they are not registered, to try to come to a determination and assess the level of irregularity in the elections. Now, the third area that I spoke about as a pillar of that we use for assessment of the integrity of the elections is the quality of the electoral staff. Now, there were quite a number of difficulties that were experienced again by the electoral staff, which forced some of the political parties to protest at the election results center and saying that the elections had been manipulated. Now, this normally happens in a situation where you find that members of the electoral staff are not properly trained. The electoral staff, they are not properly trained, or they apply the rules inconsistently. So these are some of the things that contaminated in a way the electoral processes leading to 2019 elections. And again, there were, in terms of the political environment, even though the contestation is always, during around the election time, there is tension, contestation is very intense. There had been many other areas in South Africa where the service delivery protests also affected the elections. If you take, for instance, areas such as Ruani, where the residents were still protesting, starting from 2016 elections throughout 2019. So some of those difficulties are problems that can contaminate the quality of the elections and ultimately can lead to the nullification of the results of the elections. Now, I indicated that towards the end, I will just touch on key areas leading to these elections. And then I think it is important that as I conclude, indicate the following, that when the IEC was taken to court by CAM in the Tlokwe matter, the Constitutional Court made a ruling on the issue of Tlokwe, but also emphasized the issue of freeness and fairness of the elections. And according to the Constitutional Court, there is no clear definition of the notion of free and fair elections. And therefore, in order to be able to understand that notion or concept, you've got to assess it within a context. Now, that context that I've already spoken about, in our case, it's the framework that I spoke about, which is the integrity with, or elections integrity with, all those aspects. In the case of Tlokwe, it was the voters' roll, particularly the addresses, which was a problem that led to the nullification of the election results in that area. Now, having said that, what are the kind of the issues that that we should actually be checking going into this particular elections? We have already indicated that there was an issue around COVID and the impact of COVID in the elections. And some of us had argued and even made a presentation to Justice Moseneke to say that the current environment is not conducive to free and fair elections, and therefore motivated for the postponement of the elections. That is one of the issues that also, in a way, impacted on the preparations for these elections. And I regard it as one of the issues that is likely to have an impact again, because the level of preparations by the Commission is not necessarily at the level where it could have been, largely because of this, as well as—
One more minute, Mr. Tselane. 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you. You know, so it is one of the issues that is likely to have an impact on the preparations of the elections, and then we'll be able to see the extent thereof only during after the elections. The second issue that I think is going to be an issue, which relates to the logistics, is the fact that the Commission has not had sufficient time to deal with the issues of the registration of political parties, including the preparation of the ballot papers, because registration of the political parties or the production of the ballot papers is dependent on the registration of political parties. We all know that it was only recent that you know, the Constitutional Court issued its judgment, and then immediately after that, the Commission allowed for registration of political parties and used that information for the basis of now the production, the design, production, and the printing of the ballot papers. So it is possible that going into these elections, that's where now we're going to be finding that ballot papers that are supposed to be submitted or supposed to be distributed to a particular area may not be the correct ones, or there could be problems and difficulties in terms of the design of those ballot papers that are going to be produced. Perhaps let me stop there, and then I will be able to deal with the questions when you know, question time arises. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tselane. Colleagues, maybe also let me apologize for allowing him to go over time. I think that the presentation is particularly important in light of the critique and the attacks on the IEC's integrity over the past few years as the South African political system has become even more competitive. I'm also just going to encourage everyone who is present to please send questions in through the chat box, and then these questions will be and we will discuss the papers after each and every presenter has had an opportunity to speak. I'm just going to quickly introduce Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, who will be talking to us about the prospects of the upcoming 2021 local government elections. I'm not going to read his abstract just to save time. Over to you, Mr. Breakfast, Dr. Breakfast, I apologize.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. Just to set the scene, before I make some of my central arguments, I just want to give a background to my political scenario analysis by arguing that in the 60s, what had happened was the rise of national liberation movements in post-colonial states. And this was echoed by the process of decolonization. But the interesting phenomenon were basically the mechanisms that were employed by these national liberation movements to hold on to power. One of them was the employment of nativism. And by nativism, I'm talking about a form of populism that is meant to maintain political power for the elite. According to Sabelo Ndlovu Kacheni, he argues that nativism rose to prominence in the second half of the 20th century. So nativism basically is a way of misusing historical factors, and that is done by the political elite, whereby you put the blame on the West, you romanticize about the past. Now, the ANC as a national liberation movement is also a case in point in this regard. I want to argue that it does that. Now, I find the work of Mahmoud Mamdani very, very useful when I talk about national liberation movements. Because Mahmoud Mamdani talks about sources of true power, namely cities and towns. Mahmoud Mamdani, in his seminal work titled Citizen and Subject, he talks about what he calls bifurcation. And by a bifurcated state, Mamdani is talking about the divide between the rural and the urban spaces. And his central thesis is that the legacy of colonialism, of decentralized despotism, empowers traditional leaders to influence the political behavior of the electorate in rural areas. So all in all, what Mamdani is talking about is the fact that traditional leaders are on the payroll of governments which are run by liberation movements, and in return, they bring the votes. No wonder the electoral base of the ANC is found in rural areas. Now, it must also be borne in mind that traditional leaders in villages are more popular than councillors. Everything that they say goes. There was an interesting political development that I saw on TV. I can't remember when it was. I saw the EFF giving away cattle to the king of Abatembu. And he made a commitment that the EFF is going to buy him a Mercedes-Benz. Now, the rationale behind that is to twist him to bring the votes to the EFF, but also is to erode the electoral base of the ruling party. But we shall see on that score how it goes. Now, the political longevity or the political lifespan of liberation movements tends to be extended because political behavior doesn't change overnight. And of course, this is a case in point in Zimbabwe. As you know, ZANU-PF has been in power since 1980 in Namibia. SWAPO has been in power, I think, since 1989 or since the early 90s in Mozambique. Frelimo has been in power since 1975. The same goes to Algeria, Angola, and so on. So I'm arguing that the political legitimacy of liberation movements, it comes from their struggle credentials, meaning that people don't vote for liberation movements because they have a good track record of getting the job done. The greatest advantage of any liberation movement, or the greatest advantage of the ANC, for instance, is its collective memory. From time to time, they invoke the names of stalwarts, Ndate Mandela, Raymond Saba, the list is endless. Frans Fanon argues that national liberation movements in post-colonial states, they come to power as an unprepared political elite with no economic policies. They use nativism to advance their own personal interests. Now, against this background, let's look at now what had happened in the previous local government elections. The 2016 local government elections illustrated that one-party dominance is a thing of the past. As you know, colleagues, the ANC was dealt with a blow. It received 53% in comparison to 66% that it received in 2011. And my prediction on that score is that I think in the upcoming local government elections, it will get below 50%. But I think the argument I made earlier on about national liberation movements explains why the ANC was dealt with a blow in urban centers as opposed to rural areas, because the ANC lost 3 metropolitan municipalities. And I would like to predict that I don't think that they're going to bounce back, unfortunately. I'm going to substantiate that later on. Okay, let me quickly give reasons for that, because there are different categories of the electorate. You have what I call the diehard, supporters who vote in relation to historical factors, so they vote for national liberation movements, not because they're able to promote development for the majority, but because of those historical factors. And those people are found in rural spaces. Then you get what I call the rational voters, which are part of the middle class by and large, and they vote in relation to public policy issues. And those people are entrenched in the main in urban centers, and that goes against now the ANC. And also you get the sympathizers who vote in relation to trends. So even the trends of late, they are painting a gloomy picture about the issue of lack of service delivery. The other issue is that, you saw what had happened. The deputy president was turned away in Tshwane, the president was turned away in Soweto, even here in the Nelson Mandela Bay, a lot of branches of the ANC are falling apart. So I don't think that they are going to bounce back to those municipalities. But I think they might win Mangaung and Buffalo City, including eThekwini. I'm talking about now the ANC. Why? Because, for instance, in Buffalo City, even in eThekwini, I think also in Mangaung, there are some rural areas there. And when you come across rural areas, then you must know that that is the electoral base of the ruling party. So the weaknesses of the ANC will give a rise to coalition formations. My view is that the losses of the ANC are not necessarily the gains of opposition parties, because there is a lot of political, fragmentation in this country. And again, due to lack of majoritarianism, that gives rise to coalition formations. But of course, these coalition formations, Professor Suzanne Boysen, she calls them marriages of inconvenience, because they tend to fall apart. They tend to epitomize opportunism because of, musical chairs, so to speak. But my view is that there are strong points about coalition formations. There are also weaknesses. One of the strong points of coalition formation is that they limit abuse of power, because power in a coalition formation tends to be diffused, across the board. No political party can impose its agenda on other political parties. But the challenge is that they tend to fall apart. They tend to pose a threat to the stability of a government. And you see that from time to time by the deadlocks that political parties tend to have. And if you have, for instance, a deadlock on matters of budget, that speaks directly to issues of IDP. It means that you cannot render then services to the inhabitants. So those are some of the challenges of coalition formations. Another issue that is a problem.
One more minute, Dr. Breakfast, 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to other issues in my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breakfast. I think that that's very interesting predictions. However, or rather, voter behavior in South Africa has been found to be quite enduring in that, you know, they are sustained over a period of time, and voter behavior hardly changes from one election to another that immediately. And so what I want to say is, just before we move on to the discussants, maybe let's take a few questions. We do have questions in the question and in the chat. So I wonder whether the people who asked or who sent in those questions would like to ask the questions, or if I should read out those questions, and then can have a brief discussion for maybe 5 minutes, and thereafter the discussants will respond. Okay, so I think I'm going to read the questions, and the two discussants who have presented their papers will respond, and the other two discussants will come in. The first question we have is from Professor Berry Rulwani, if I'm not mistaken, and he asks Mr. Tselane, excuse me, does Mr. Tselane hold the integrity of the IEC in good standing since the 2016 local government elections, and the electorate and mass have, or does the electorate have confidence in the same IEC? So I suppose the question is asking whether Mr. Tselane still considers the integrity of the IEC to be intact in the aftermath of the 2016 local government elections. And then the second question, again to Mr. Tselane, is, did the EFF break any electoral code of conduct by gifting the Abatembu king with cows and the promise of the cow? Did the EFF break any electoral code of conduct by gifting the Abatembu king with cows and promise of a car? Is that an inducement for the king to harvest votes for the EFF? The two other questions, I'm going to ask them to Dr. Breakfast, and it's from Sondezi, where he asks, we are currently living in a country wherein the media landscape is highly politicized, and to what extent does the media coverage impact on the integrity of the elections? The other question is, where local government is concerned, service delivery is often an issue. Can we blame poor service delivery purely on corruption, or should we also look into the developmental policies and bylaws passed by each municipal council across the country? So, colleagues, let me say this. Let the two speakers answer the first four questions as I've posed them, and then the other questions I will ask after the responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me try to respond to some of those questions. On the integrity of the Electoral Commission, in my opinion, the organization is still handling the issues with integrity. There are, however, decisions that have been taken in the past that may lead to people questioning the integrity of the elections, and in this, rather, the integrity of the commission. As the person who asked the question correctly pointed out, some of these issues are historical, starting from the way the commission dealt with the 2016 matters in Tlokwe. Because if you remember well, in that during that occasion, people who were contesting the elections or the by-elections there were people who were coming from the ANC. They were a break away from the ANC. And the fact that when they raised their issues with the commission did not seem to take them seriously, to the extent that they had to end up going to the electoral court, and from the electoral court to the constitutional court, and eventually constitutional court made the ruling that it did. So how the commission dealt with those kind of issues may have created an impression to some people that The IEC was siding with the ruling party during that particular period against people who had actually decided to move away from the ANC. And also that the application of the law had not been up to standard. I've indicated that Section 16.3 of the Electoral Act requires that every person who participates in the election should have an address. But instead of actually ensuring that there is compliance with that provision, the Commission attempted to abrogate its responsibility by saying that there are people who don't have addresses in the villages, in informal settlement, when in actual fact, in the areas that were being contested, there were proper addresses. It's not that those addresses had not actually been captured. So it is one of the issues that may have led to people to start questioning the integrity of the Commission. But also, I think also you will recall that the Commission was dealing with quite a number of issues that eventually led to the resignation of our former chairperson, Advocate Tlakula. But I think another element was the fact that, there were quite a number of the decisions that were taken even during that period that could have led to people beginning to doubt the integrity of the Commission. Some of the issues, for instance, that are also contributing, it's how the Commission has dealt with the registration of parties, the postponement of the elections, why didn't they go to Parliament, the arguments that they were raising. Some of those factors, yes, could have led to that, but I still believe that where they make the mistakes, it's just a genuine mistake, but they still try to apply the law to do things according to the requirements of the Constitution and their obligations in terms of the relevant legislation. Now, the issue of whether the EFF has broken the code of conduct, where it talks about the inducement, prohibits, it is what they call a prohibited conduct. It is prohibited to the extent that you're giving a particular person something in return for a vote. So I don't know the details of King Kaya and the EFF, what the arrangements are, what is the base of that? Is that what was it given this on the basis that is going to be voting for the EFF? So those are some of the details that I think can be investigated when a person has got proper information and facts and be able to see as to whether there is a violation. But if it is just a gift, it might not necessarily be a violation. But if there is an expectation that a person who's been given a gift should vote in a particular way, it could actually be a violation. So I don't know true facts about that particular area, and then therefore I'm not able to offer a clear response in terms of whether it is actually an inducement or not.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tselane. And Dr. Breakfast, as you begin to answer the questions that were directed at you, maybe you can also provide us some input regarding whether you think that the EFF, because that was one of the things that you mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, so I think we need to grapple with the question as to what extent do traditional leaders have to encourage the electorate in their localities to participate in public affairs. I don't think that is a disrespectful question, in as much as I do concede that they have a role to play. But at the same time, I also think that if they are going to enter into the political domain, it might compromise them. What did not sit well with me was the fact that the king of Abatembu encouraged his followers to vote for the EFF. I think that is troublesome. I have a problem with that personally, because it's like, I think it's like taking advantage of your followers, because some people, they accept everything that their kings tell them uncritically. And also, if you are going to promote a particular political party, in the same way, you must also expect your followers to disagree with you. So that's why I'm arguing that I think it compromises them, in my view. With regard to the issue of the media, I think the ideas that are dominant in any capitalist mode of production are the ideas of the ruling class. The media is not ideologically neutral. It is part of the superstructure. And of course, if you look at the issue of ownership, I think that speaks volumes. But I think the space still needs to be contested. I think in order for our democracy to flourish or to be consolidated, we need different voices, not only voices of a particular class, but different voices. I missed the second question. Do you mind to remind me?
I think there are a lot more questions in the chat. So what we will do is let us have the two other speakers provide their responses to the papers that you and Mr. Tselane have presented. Thereafter, we will continue on with the question and answer session. So just to proceed, I am going to invite Dr. Piet Krokamp as the first discussant and respondent to the papers or to the presentations that we just enjoyed. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues and everybody. It's a privilege for me to rather indirectly meet Terry at last. I think we follow each other on Twitter. It's always informative and interesting. I think broadly to summarize, I think he shares concerns about the electoral process, the IEC perhaps even, and also maybe the statutory framework, the legislative framework within which an election occur. And there's certain ambiguities about free and fair and the interpretation thereof that he raises, I think, important questions about. I think for me, what is important here, what he talks about is that it's important that we have consensus about the statutory framework, the rules and the regulations of an election. It's important that everybody buys into it, whether you're rural or urban, whether you, let me just get this. It's important that whether you are rural or urban or whether you have a specific ideological disposition, etc., you still believe in the rules of the political game or the rules of the electoral game. And I think that's an important emphasis that he puts on the argument. The second thing is that important that political parties and individual participants conform and comply with that electoral regime. If there's a sense of that operating outside the rules and the regulations of the game, have a particular advantage or questioning the rules of the game belatedly to get a political advantage from it, that it is detrimental and to a certain degree undermining the trustworthiness of the statutory process, of the electoral system, which I think is of critical importance, that South Africans should trust the electoral system. They should trust that the outcome of that system will be reflective of the greater political will of all South Africans, regardless of whether you won or lose the election. I think a third point I think that Terry makes is the importance of a political environment conducive to a fair contest. And if you live in South Africa with extreme poverty, the cost of transport, for instance, for poor people, we know in some areas, in informal settlements, some South Africans spend between 30 and 60% of their basic income or their net income just to make it to work. If the cost of of migrating towards a position where you have to cast your vote becomes high. It becomes inhibited. But more so than that, in areas where there are high levels of crime, and we know there are a number of areas where there are high levels of crime, the cost of migrating between one point to another, in other words, to get up in the morning, leave your home and go and vote, it could be that it comes at a particular cost to your own safety. So generally, I think it is a concern in South Africa that perhaps we can ask a question about to what extent is participation inhibited by a political environment. We know in for instance, if I can use the, we now know for a fact that less than half of all eligible South Africans do vote in elections. It is a good question, why don't we participate in elections? Half of the people don't get up in the morning on the 1st of November and think I'm going to vote for new political leadership, or I'm going to vote for my political leader in this election. There are motivations for that, and I think that's worth investigating, interrogating, discussing, and getting to the grip of it. Why is it that people do not vote? I know that generally worldwide elections tend to be, the involvement in elections tend to be lower than one would expect, especially in more established democracies. But in a highly contentious environment such as ours, one would expect a very, very high turnout. And we used to have a very, very high turnout, but we had it of those voters that are registered. Remember, there are registered voters and there are eligible voters. And we have a serious concern that less than half of our voters that are eligible to vote actually go out and vote in South Africa. Less than half are now, I think, I'm not sure if the registered, maybe terrible know what percentage are registered, but less than half of the people that could vote are actually going out to vote. And then another question, to what extent is the result a reflection of the collective will of the people? And I think that's an important question to many people. They want to know, was the result the collective will of South Africans? For instance, if we for instance argue that 52 or 54% of South Africans have voted for the ANC, but we only say those that actually are those who are actually registered to vote. We're not talking about those that who are eligible to vote. That figure might be completely different. What does people who do not vote tell us about what they think about the political system and the fairness of the system and the electoral outcome? And I think the important thing here is, do we trust our democracy with our vote? And I think that to some extent touches on what Dr. Breakfast has argued about. If you make the rural-urban divide, and it seems like he makes the assumption that if you vote for, or if your vote is determined by your relationship with an unelected individual, such as a traditional leader, for instance, what is the quality of that vote? Well, I just think that very few people actually just vote in terms of their own interest. They do believe the president, they do believe John Steenhuisen, they do believe Patricia de Lille, they do believe their leadership to some extent. In fact, very few people might be informed enough to actually make a vote based on a rational choice. And that's one of the other concerns I think that Terry had, and that is that to what extent have we had proper voter education? I don't think we've had voter education for a very long time in South Africa. Voter education, to a certain degree, imbues the idea of voting according to a rational choice, not voting for a party because they're the liberation movement, or because they're liberal, or because they're white, or because they're Muslim, or because they're Christian. It must be based on the rational choice as opposed to sectarian interest. And local government elections makes provision for the individual to vote for his particular interest rather than for a collective interest. What is in my interest in the community that I live? And maybe perhaps also what is in my immediate community interest, as opposed to what is in the interest of another community. It does allow for that type of, I don't want to use the word individualism, but it does allow for that particularism where I can vote for the interest that is of immediate concern to me. And I think that's where what is Dr. Breakfast's real concern. I think it is a concern, but I find it difficult if we say that if you are influenced by a traditional leader, unless the traditional leader tell you what to vote, and there's a penalty if you don't vote for his political preference. But the fact is, we all are told by our political leaders who to vote for and who not to vote for. I think the important thing is just lastly, if I can summarize the idea about coalition parties. Coalitions have always been unstable in South Africa, and it was largely due to the fact that it was in search of political power. It was an effort to get control of a particular municipality or particular metro. If coalitions are formed on the basis of ideological similarity or common interest, then usually they last a lot longer. And you get that in many countries where coalitions, like Germany and Holland, they are often governed by coalitions. And the reason being that the political parties that do form a form of alliance to gain political authority do get it on the basis of what they agree about rather than what divide them. So, but if you can think in terms of South Africa, what exactly is there between the DA and the EFF that are similar to them, except for the fact that they were in search of political power? And I think that is something, we know our future is about coalitions in South Africa, and we will see this election. We have a good reason to believe that many municipalities and many metros may be managed by coalitions in the aftermath of this election. The question is, what is the connective tissue, the binding power between the different parties in search of political authority? And I think that's my brief summary of what the two speakers have said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peter. And I think that you spoke on a very important factor, which is, that missing voter education, which we have not seen in a very long time in the South African context. I would just like to invite our last speaker, excuse me, colleagues, Dr. Ntwera, who's going to be our last speaker. And I'm just going to request that you please keep it in between 8 minutes so that we have enough time for a few questions after. Over to you, Dr. Ntwera. Ntwera, sorry.
Thank you, Program Director, for the platform. Let me sum up the issues that our esteemed panelists have just presented to us. They all have something valuable to add to our debate this morning on how, as a country, we should cope in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. I concur with the previous speaker. It is true that Mr. Zelani comes into the debate with a wealth of knowledge on how electoral systems should be managed. Not forgetting that he contributed towards the establishment of our very own election body. And in today's debate, he shared his experience, and he spoke about the development of this election integrity will to access the integrity of the elections. He emphasized that the tool interrogates issues of political environment and legal framework, among other pillars. But I think these two pillars are important because he said they determine determine whether the elections are free and fair, even in the middle of COVID-19. But in this will, I am missing voter education, as our previous speaker has alluded. But all in all, I think an assessment of this nature is commendable. And I hope that African countries embrace this towards realizing better elections in their respective countries. I also think that we should also talk about the impact of COVID-19 on our electoral system. And I would like to make a reference here of a paper that was released recently by the Commonwealth Africa chapter. This is a good reference because in this paper, the authors identified the challenges that some of African countries encountered since the pandemic. These are matters of additional election financing and how to manage voter registration processes and campaigning, and how to manage stakeholder engagements to ensure a success implementation of changes due to COVID to electoral programs. The paper also come up with innovations and, for example, the embracing the use of technology And I would like maybe Mr. Tselane to talk about it, because it should form part of the integrity wheel. Because now with the switching from normal day to day to technology, I think it should be interesting to see how African countries fare in terms of access to technology and how they conduct their electoral systems. South Africa, we know that is at an advanced stage compared to the rest of the continent, because even before COVID-19, the IEC had platforms online, such as candidate and voters portal. You could even locate your voting station online. So I think we have been having all of that before. So in sum, I think these are the main points that Mr. Tselane raised. When it comes to our second speaker, Dr. Breakfast, I mean, his issues were on the political lifespan of our political parties, our liberation movement, including the ANC, and why their electoral base is in the rural areas. And he argued that voters do not only vote for this liberation movement because of good record and service delivery, but it has to do with their collective credentials over the past 100 years or so. So, and he also predicted that ANC will continue losing voters, and even when it comes to the coalition formations, so they are here, we can't wish them away. And I would like to add the issue of independent candidates, because I think it's very important here. And the number, we all know that the number of independents has increased tremendously, and they are in hundreds. So the message that they are sending, I think, is that political parties have been with us and they've let people of South Africa down for too many times. So we are here, we are the alternative, and in other words, we are here to depopularize the system of local government, depoliticize, I mean to say, the system of local government. So we are here as professionals. So, for example, Moses movement, One South Africa, this one is dominating the headlines in this matter, and there is another group that has organized itself under the New Horizon, I guess. A New Horizon banner is in Mfuleni local municipality, and one wonders if indeed they are the future of South Africa democracy. So in sum, I think, Program Director, I will end here because of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nenswera. So what I'm going to do now is we have quite a number of questions in the chat box, and they're mainly directed at you, Dr. Breakfast. So what I'm going to ask is that I'm going to read you all of the questions, and maybe you can give us a summarized view of all the topics, all the questions that are being posed in the chat room. I don't see Dr. Breakfast anymore. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay, I was not seeing your face. So we do have a few questions for you on the chat. And the first one, which is where we left off in the previous discussion, is, can we blame poor service delivery purely on corruption, or should we also look into the developmental policies and bylaws passed by each municipality? Secondly, the 2021 ANC election campaign is reliant on using senior national leaders to garner votes, right? So this question then, this statement is followed by two questions. Does this strategy undermine the legitimacy of the ANC, the legitimacy and integrity of local government leaders, and also will bringing young candidates into the ANC's foray also reinvigorate the political party and maybe help it garner more votes. And also please touch on the Zuma factor and its impact in the KwaZulu-Natal area. And finally, as you summarize those few questions, is there an alternative to the ANC in the South African political system?
Yeah, so corruption is a problem, no doubt about that. But at the same time, I don't think that we can only attribute lack of service delivery to corruption. I think since the restructuring of local government, we have seen, and analysts don't talk about this quite often, even academics, since the restructuring of local government, we have seen an application of market-related policies, market fundamentalism, privatization of services for purposes of cost recovery. That's why, for instance, in Johannesburg, Trevor Ngwana left the ANC in opposition to those policies, and then formed the Anti-Privatization Forum and the Soweto Crisis Committee. So the model of development that is employed, I don't think that it does achieve its intended objectives of improving the lives of the people qualitatively at local government level. So I'm arguing that there is more to issues of lack of service delivery at local government level than merely corruption. The issue of electoral withdrawal, I think we are going to see a lower voter turnout because of political complacency. I think a lot of people, they feel let down by the powers that be, in particular the youth who are bearing the brunt of unemployment, poverty, inequality. So I agree with the point that was made earlier on, that there is a need for a rolling out of political education to deal with this issue. But the issue of political apathy amongst the youth is a global phenomenon. It is not only confined to our context. The Zuma faction, how is that going to impact on the electoral performance of the ANC? I think the ANC throughout history has had different phases of conflicts, and even while in exile, and it was able to overcome them. But the conflict that has broken out at the moment within the ANC is not ideological in nature, has to do with who stands a chance to benefit from the resources of local government, the resources of provincial government, and the resources of national government. People don't want to let go of political power because political power protects them from being prosecuted. And also political power allows them to have access to resources. So those differences within the ANC, I think they will have a negative spillover effect to the electoral performance of the ANC. I think, in my humble opinion, the people who belong to the Zuma faction, they wouldn't want a situation whereby the ANC gets a margin that is above what it got in the previous elections at local government level, because it will paint a picture that Ramaphosa has done well, and Zuma, doesn't stand out, or he was bad for the ANC. So yeah, that's my summary.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breakfast. I also have, excuse me, 2 questions for Mr. Zelane. Are you still on the line with us?
Yes, I'm listening.
Yes, thank you. So the one question is, how do you reconcile, or how does the IEC reconcile the contestation of the right to vote with the requirement to have a home address in order to be able to register to vote? So what is the meeting point essentially for people to uphold, for the IEC to uphold people's right to vote, even though they don't have a valid home address? And then the second question is in relation to, the logistical challenges that the IEC has faced. So how can they continue to work within the prescripts of the legislation to ensure that the elections are free and fair while following, the national state of disaster? Maybe you can speak to those 2 points for us.
Thank you very much. Let me deal firstly with the issue of the address. As I indicated earlier on, this is one of the arguments that was raised by the IEC during the Constitutional Court hearings, to say that the reason why the IEC did not have the addresses for many people is largely because people do not have conventional addresses. However, what the Constitutional Court has said is that a person does not necessarily have to have a conventional address in order for them to be captured in the system. Every person lives in a particular geographic area, and that geographic area must be indicated either through a statement or by describing the features of the location where a person is, and then use that information as an address. So the address does not have to be a home address. And then you only using that information for the purpose of locating person to the correct station or to the correct district, and then also to make sure that political parties are able to contest to the right constituency. So it is not about having a home address. And then also there is no requirement for a person to produce evidence of where they stay when they register. You just have to provide information, and that information, you'll be accepted as a true information. The areas of the logistical challenges, the IEC has got obligation to make sure that it delivers the elections, irrespective of whatever logistical challenges that it could actually be having. So it can't use any of those as an excuse not to deliver the elections. Of course, we accept that there have been quite a number of interruptions that have affected the capacity of the IEC to prepare for these elections, but that cannot be used as an excuse either. The organization must make sure that they deliver in terms of their obligations according to the Constitution. In any case, the elections take place after every 5 years. The organization had 5 years to prepare for this election, and therefore, even though there were interruptions at the logistical level, it cannot be used to justify its incapacity to deliver in terms of its mandate according to the Constitution. There is a person who raised an issue about the ballot missing. My view is that the ballot papers are the most precious commodity in the hands of electoral officials. Now, I know that there were occasions like in Alexander in 2016 where the ballot papers were strewn in the streets. And then by that time, we said that those ballot papers had already been counted. But that is not the point. Even if the ballot papers have already been counted, the law requires the commission to keep the ballot papers for 6 months so that if there is a query or a request for a recount, they should go back to the ballots and then be able to count them. So even if they have already been counted, it is completely unacceptable for the ballot papers to be all over the place, because otherwise it's
30 seconds. 30 seconds, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Tselane. I think then let me ask the two final speakers for their closing remarks and then immediately transition to Professor Pago, who will close up the webinar for us. Thank you.
Hello?
Dr. Piet, your parting shot in 13 seconds? In 30 seconds, sorry. Dr. Zwerama. Let me then do this because we only have 2 minutes left. Let me ask Dr. Breakfast to please give us his parting shot in 1 minute or less, and then ask Professor Kidibone Pago to please end off this very interesting discussion this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one-party dominance is a thing of the past. I think we are going to see a number of coalition formations. Though I like I said, I mean, I don't think that the losses of the ANC are the gains of opposition parties. I've been very much disappointed of late by the strategies that have been used by opposition parties. I don't think that they will outmaneuver completely the ANC. Yes, they might have a positive spillover effect for them, but I don't think that it will hamper the ANC that much. I think the electoral base of the ANC in rural areas, it will not be eroded. But I think the ANC at the same time will not bounce back to urban centers, the ones that they lost in 2016.
Thank you. Professor Pago, may you please give us your closing remarks?
Yes, thank you, Naledi. Thank you, colleagues, for a very interesting conversation this morning. It is indeed very clear to us as a scholarly community, as citizens of this country, that the question of local government elections, it's very serious because it talks squarely to the issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. So these are basic service delivery issues of water, electricity, roads, maintenance, and so on. But my role, colleagues, is just to thank our speakers, our guests this morning, Ndate Terry Tselane, Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, Dr. Farizeni Netswera, Dr. Piet Krokamp, and Naledi Mudisa, who was our very able program director. I am very grateful, colleagues. I think our participation was very much alive. We were active. We have received a lot of questions and just want to thank you so much for taking your time to participate. I want to thank our dean as well. He is already disconnected, but I think his support is really amazing. The organizers, we have an organizing committee for our seminars, Naledi, Dr. Gideon Van Riet, we have Dr. Frank Lekaba as well. Thank you, colleagues, for all the efforts and your attention to details. Let's keep talking. I will make sure this is posted on our website in the next few days. So you can always visit our website if you want to revisit this conversation. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Naledi. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
Sharp, sharp.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Unatu. Nice having you here as well. Hey, Valerie, good to see you.
Papa,
Yes, hey, the ambassador is here. Oh, wow.
how are you?
Good to see you. Thank you so
Sure.
much. Yeah.
Oh,
good.
great.
Yeah.
Sure.
How's France? Are you in Paris?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for
I'm in my office. I just decided to come through. Yeah.
thank you so much.
But
Let's
it was
later
great.
this evening. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.